I see that it's now just exactly 8 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and start. As usual, I'll start with my little prayer of gratitude. Thank you to the source of creation, the being of all, the being of the whole universe, and the being of the life that breathes in all the beings. Thank you for being all the beings of creation. And of all the beings of creation, thank you for being our dear ancestors, whose presence is responsible for our being here. Thank you to the divinity, to the divine, to the being in all of us for blessing our webinar tonight with the ability to move into new territory, to promote the transformations and changes that will be most beneficial for everyone in the group, everyone without exception, to work efficiently and profoundly and gracefully, comfortably, to empower everyone who's with us here tonight in person, in real time, and everyone who will be with us in the future, and all the values of creation that are here on subtler levels. So to empower everyone with greater capacity, understanding technologies, to master the energy healing process, to become adept and confident and capable with energy healing, and always with deepest reverence. Thank you to the eternal tradition of wisdom, to the great holy tradition. All right. So today's webinar is about seeing like an energy healer. And I want to spend plenty of time tonight doing healing work, or we focus collectively as a group on the energy healing processes or transformations that support everyone in the group, opening up finer perception, opening up a greater capacity to analyze and synthesize information through intuition, through inference, the different tools of the energy healer. I'd like to talk about some of the fine mechanics of how we can extrapolate from perceptions that come in, which are like sometimes really fine and really abstract. How do we get from there into what's actually like a clear diagnosis for a person or for ourselves? And then, of course, plenty of, as I mentioned before, healing time for everybody so that we can move into some new territory as well. All right, so that's the title of tonight's, or that's the title plus the overview of tonight's talk and tonight's session. And thank you all so much for being with me. All right, so now I think what I'm going to do is, what I feel like doing is just looking into the group and just see what's going on with everybody. Just see where people's needs are and where would be a good place to start. Because I know there's a range of experience. Some of you have been with me for a really, really long time, like years and years. Some have been with me more recently. Some people are already very intuitive, and some already having very refined perception, others not as much. And so I'm just sort of feeling where the bar is, so we know where to go with that and how I can best serve all of you by bringing forth the information verbally and otherwise in a way that's useful to everyone. I'd like to add in a couple more little things. One is that we've talked before about where we look, right? You can look at the different levels of the physiology. You can look at the dense physical. You can look in, oh, you have a cheek, I see. Or you can go into deeper levels, the mental body, the emotional, oh, I see there's some longing in the heart, or deeper, even finer levels where the belief systems are, like that, down to the deepest, most delicate level of feeling, and then into the field of all being, where we're all connected, completely connected together. So this is one of the ways we can look as energy healers, is from denser levels of self down to finer levels of self. But there's another way we can look too. And I found this to be very useful. It's just come up just since the last webinar. Any of you who were with me last time might recall that I added a little artwork in the follow-up email from the last webinar that was by a nice man, an artist in I think he lives in England right now, but he's a European artist who has spent a lot of time looking at different realms of creation. And what I discovered was that we can think of the range of from very dense to very subtle like one axis on a grid. And we can look at the range from very like dark and sort of hellish, kind of unpleasant, to very, very light and very beautiful and sweet and like heavenly and beautiful realms of creation as another axis. So we kind of have two axes that we're working with, really, when we're working with energy healing. So we kind of have to look at both, right? So just to put them two in perspective with each other so it all makes sense to everyone, that at every point in the continuum, we can experience a range from very unpleasant to very, very pleasant. And the cool thing that as human beings, because the range of our physiology is from subtle to gross, or, dense to subtle, or to abstract, is that we have this interesting ability and freedom to traverse the range of what I'm using the word realms to describe, the different realms of creation, from more darker and unpleasant to more lighter and pleasant. And it's interesting that we have the freedom to do that. So I was looking at that, and I was applying, relating the fact that we have this capability to the nature of our reality as human beings, and what is that we're actually doing here. And what I realized is that the being of all has created us all, our little antennas, the antennas of the universe, the antennas of divine being, has created us in order to have a human experience, to see itself from the human perspective. And the difference between the being of all knowing, all present, all powerful being is that for that level of being, there are no surprises and there's nothing to learn. What's to learn if you know everything? There's nothing to learn. So, but however, okay, so here's being, knows everything, is done everything, is everywhere at all times in all places, and completely full. And yet, there is this reality that we live in an expanding universe, and being has created the expanding universe in order to understand itself even yet better than it already does. So besides just being everything, it wants to understand its being. And so it understands its being through the expanding universe. So as humans, where we're at is that we come from being, right? From a state in the spirit world where we kind of know everything and are full. We're full in the totality of creation. And we come into the limitations of human experience. And in the limitations of human experience, we don't know everything. We get to have an experience. We get to, like, the very nature of human life is to experience expansion of consciousness. It's to experience the aspect of the universe that is kind of like the interface between being and its own creation. So as humans, we have these experiences of like surprises and learning new things, and those times when the mind kind of flashes with, oh, aha, new information. And when we have those experiences, that is when we are like very, very, very close, very intimately integrated with the very fundamental laws of nature of creation, where being is interfacing with the relative and giving rise to expansion of consciousness and expansion of material development and evolution and expansion of happiness and expansion of everything. Okay, so that's where we are as humans. Now, to relate that to the realms of creation, how does that work? So what I noticed was that with every expansion, there's an upliftment of being. Every time we learn something new or we understand something we didn't understand before, there's a kind of upliftment of the energy frequency of being, of self. And we naturally identify ourselves with a broader definition of what it is to be human and who we are. So what happens is, as we're going along on this axis, is that we're kind of like marching toward the more heavenly realms. Every time we make a move or a choice, and it's a choice as a human, we have a choice. Do we want to hang out in the darker, more gnarly areas of creation, or do we want to be in the brighter, lighter areas of creation? We have a choice. Some of it is choice. Some of it is based on the nature of what we choose or we identify ourselves to be. I'll go into that in just a minute. But the point is that as we move toward the more soft, divine, heavenly realms of creation, what happens is just being in those spaces internally, mentally, emotionally, it has a refining effect on the physiology. So the process of stabilizing our reality at a sweeter, nicer, finer level of creation is a byproduct of both selecting to be in that space and the modifications that take place in the physiology that support stabilization in that space. And we know, I'm just going to use an example right now because that's kind of abstract. So we know even on the dense level of creation that some of us are living in places on Earth that are pretty nice. There's freedom of speech, there's freedom of choice, people have, autonomy to own land, and you can drive places, and there's access to lots of resources that a person might need to be comfortable and happy. And by contrast, there are, in the physical realm of creation, places on Earth where that's not the case, where life isn't very nice. It's more awful. Okay. So the same goes for the subtle levels. We can mentally set ourselves in a nicer, higher, sweeter place, or we can mentally go into a denser level of self, or emotionally. Okay. So I wanted to bring that out just to provide a richer diagram or a richer roadmap for the work that we're doing. And the reason is that when we're seeing as energy healers, we really are seeing different realms of creation. If one looks into the body of someone who's feeling ill, or looks into one's own body at some organ or some part that's not feeling happy, what's happening is that area has sort of taken on the shape and form associated with some of the darker, denser realms of creation. And to bring it up, that was one last point I needed to make about the realms. To really, really stabilize the more heavenly realms of creation, what we do is, after being in those heavenly realms and seeping in that lovely, very bright, very high frequency resonation of consciousness, then we stabilize it by traversing into the denser realms and uplifting them. That's a stabilization. So it's not as humans, it's not that we just go hang out with the angels all the time and, play in the garden with the fairies all day long. No. It's good to be in that space and to know, oh yes, this is also my reality. This is an aspect of my essential nature, and it feels right. It feels more comfortable. It feels more natural to be in those sweeter, lighter spaces. But now I have to integrate that information by going into the denser spaces and applying that. See, the cool thing about the human body is it changes a little more slowly than the mental and emotional and subtler bodies, right? So when we spend a lot of time like meditating, for example, or in those finer realms of creation, the body takes on those qualities of light, and then it holds the quality of light, thus allowing us to move into the denser areas and allow our light to act like a contrast to the density, to uplift. And we can do it. Our bodies help us. Our physical bodies actually are part of the mechanism by which that happens. And same as an energy healer looking into the dense levels of creation or something, it's the same if we're looking into, let's say there's an organ of the physiology that's not happy, or in your body or in somebody else's body. And what we do is we put the attention there, and you can feel when you go into that area, and we'll talk in just a minute more about how we feel that. We go in and we feel that there's some discord there, some, denser emotions, some discordant feelings, or something stuck, some stuck energy. And the stuck energy almost always is stuck because there's a belief in there, like a kind of a rigidly held belief that doesn't want to move. So when you feel stuck energy, almost always belief systems. Okay, so you get in there and you feel that thing, that stuck energy or those discordant feelings. And then because the rest of the body is all right, if it's your own body, or because the body of the energy healer is holding onto those higher frequency vibrations, then we're able to go in and provide a contrast, the awareness or attention of the energy healer into that dense energy shines a light. And the light has just like regular lights have certain energy frequencies in them. So that light of awareness goes in and it's vibrating at a really, really high, really pure, really refined energy frequency. And it interfaces with that heavier, denser energy, or that stuck energy that's in the suffering part of the body. And what happens is it causes an experience of contrast. A relationship, basically, is created right there where you've got the denser thing going on, and then you've got the lighter thing going on. And just as our physiologies will take on the resonant qualities of the finer realms of creation, so when awareness goes in and it's vibrating at a really high level and it starts to interact or interface with that denser material will start to take on the higher frequency. And you can ask, well, why doesn't the energy of the healer take on the lower frequency? And the answer is that the higher frequency vibration is a finer or purer representative of pure being, of divine being. So the aspect of light that's brought in by the healer or by yourself to yourself is that aspect which it's basically it's the representative of being. Being is being. It's divine being is the source of creation. It is that all-knowing, all-seeing, all-present power of creation that's present in everything. And so by its nature, it's more stable because divine being is eternal, whereas those moments of suffering are more temporary. Ooh, questions coming in. Thank you for your questions. I had one question, but it's from someone in Europe, and I don't think they'll be with us till tomorrow. So thank you. So when you say that there are darker aspects in areas of potential disease, for example, do you mean things like shame or fear? Yes. For example, I believe that I became ill with Crohn's disease based on my shame. Once I healed that shame with love, I was healed. Oh, beautiful experience. Yes, absolutely. So the thing is that, oh, it says, okay, now you're explaining exactly what I just asked. Thank you. Never mind. Oh, sorry. I should have read the second question first, but I think I like the question anyway. So I just would like to make a point, like to elaborate on that. And that is that we can look at the discordant feelings like shame or, any variety of discordant feelings. What happens is those feelings tend to hang out in the darker realms of creation, whereas the lighter feelings, like feelings of gratitude and altruism and love and so forth, hang out at the higher realms of creation. And that was one of the nice discoveries of this guy, this artist that I was telling you about, who'd kind of presented from his perspective this idea of the realms, which I really appreciated. So that was his observation, because he was going into the realms. Now, what he was doing was out-of-body experiences, and each to their own. But I personally am not a big fan of out-of-body experiences, because I feel that a lot of the work that we do in energy healing is about integrating with the body, not separating from the body. So, and I'm not saying that it's wrong that he's doing that, because he's doing what he's doing and that's good for him. And that's, everybody does what they do, right? And his work is contributing to my work. And it's not just, and I'm not saying that and it's okay that my work doesn't include everything. That's okay, because that's the deal about being human, is that we are just seeing part of the picture, and that gives us the opportunity to see more of the picture as we go along. So it's all good. Okay. Anyway, the point is that in out-of-body experiences, which he described as like an extension or an expansion on the lucid dream experience, he was meeting up with different beings in the different realms. And one of the first things he noticed was that beings in the darker, denser realms of creation tended to be a lot more, in the very, very dense levels were like even psychotic. But then in the darker areas were more like very self-centered, like kind of greedy or selfish, or, not thinking or caring about other people like that. And as you move to finer, lighter, more pleasant, heavenly realms of creation, those the quality of the beings that hang out there were sweeter, softer, lighter, kinder, more thoughtful, more creative, more intelligent, like that. So of course, naturally, people want to move into the lighter areas. But as I was examining this from the angle of my perspective with energy healing, what I noticed was that as human beings, we literally exist in all the realms all the time. In dreams, we tend to experience them in more compartmentalized forms, in dream and sleep, but in waking, it's all present, all the time. And we choose where we're going to place ourselves, depending on the need of the situation, depending on the need of the time. So thank you for that question. It was a good question. And so, yeah, the stomach was sort of weighed down by some aspect of some denser realm of creation. And of course, realms are collective constructs, which I think is really important and is an important point here, including the realms that we experience in dreams. We think of them, well, that was my dream. But the truth is that the realms that we experience in dreams are to some degree shared. They are collectively formed realms. It's my experience. So when we're dealing with healing the physiology, we definitely look at the discordant feelings that might be in some part of the being, but it's really good to also look at the relationship between the individual and the collective, because on some level, some part of the individual got a little overwhelmed or overshadowed by some density that was in the collective consciousness, and therefore bought into the concept of shame, for example. So it's not like, when a person is feeling ill, it's not like they're a bad person. It's just that everyone is exposed to all the realms all the time. And sometimes people get a little caught up in some of the darker realms. And when that happens, there's always a reason, because there's something there in that darker realm that needs to be uplifted. That's why a human goes in there in the first place, is because we have this nice ability in our physiologies to hold the higher resonations as we go into the darker areas and then create transformation. So that's what we're doing. And we're doing it all the time. That's what learning is all about. All right. So let's go in and see what we can do in the way of healings for everybody in the group to accommodate the ability to comfortably move through the different realms of creation and comfortably appreciate their reality at different levels of density. I'm looking into the group. And I'm starting out my awareness and and I'll explain you as I'm going, because this is what this webinar is about, is how does a seer see? How does a healer see? So the physiology and the consciousness, also the physical, but also the subtler levels of the individual, have a naturally reflective quality. We reflect each other's ideas and feelings and the universe and everything. So when I'm looking into the field of our webinar, what I'm really doing is I'm directing my attention out through the avenue of awareness, and that's where we're going to start with this healing, by the way, is in the avenue of awareness. I'm sending it out into the webinar, and then I'm self-referring to reflect on my own being and say, well, where does my awareness or attention naturally fall? Where does it go to? Where is it attracted to sit? Where is it attracted to sit in myself? And I trust that in that moment of self-referral, I'm going all the way back to the source of creation. So that's why I'm able to trust that the information that I'm getting is good and that it's true. In faith healing, that's called putting it in the hands of Jesus. Faith healing, that's why it's like through Jesus, through the Son of God. And there's that aspect in everyone. That Son of God aspect is present in because we reflect, right? So we all exist as the manifestations of the divine. And so it is that embodiment of divinity aspect that's like the reflector. It's like the mirror. So I look out in the field and I see the avenue of awareness is what comes first to there's an innocence, right? I self-reflect and I'm like, I'm just innocently, wherever my awareness wants to go, where does it go? It goes to the avenue of awareness. So the avenue of awareness is the instrument of self that is just beneath the surface of the senses. It's kind of like the quality of consciousness that's sort of behind the quality of the senses. Avenue of awareness. And we know that there are 5 aspects because the different senses of perception are associated with the 5 elements of creation: space, air, fire, water, and earth. Space is for hearing. Air is for touch, right? Because we're touching the air all the time. Our skin is like ever in contact with the air. Fire is for seeing. Um, let's see, fire, and then water is for smelling, tasting the watery environment of the mouth, and then smelling is for earth. And that's where we actually get little particles, right? Like that's how we smell, is little particles in the air come in and they interact with the nervous tissue, the nerve tissues, and the sensory tissues in the nose. So we have these 5 elements, and we have these 5 senses. Avenue of awareness, we could say then, is divided into 5 levels. And we're looking at avenue of awareness for everyone. And the first thing that I'm feeling is the source of each person's truth comes from impulses of the heart. Your truth is seated in the heart area. And these impulses of the heart come up through the body, they arise, and there's a filtering that takes place in the cerebellum. And this filtering is one of the first filters. Also, with all appreciation to the quality of intelligence, the Davic, you could say, or the consciousness intelligence that oversees that part of the physiology, in alignment with today's sort of the energies of this day also. That intelligence is very, very strong today. So not to get too Vedic on everybody, but anyway, structures of creation. So we have support. We have support from the subtle intelligence of the physiology that oversees the brainstem and oversees the cerebellum in order to support in expansion of our understanding of the nature of the filtering system, because the senses are only allowed to pick up what the brain supports. And so here's what I'm feeling. I'm feeling, I'm just reflecting it through my system to everyone, a bilateral symmetry in the back of the brain, the brainstem area. That bilateral symmetry is in part responsible for the reflective nature of human consciousness. In fact, the bilateral symmetry of the whole brain ties in to the reflective nature. The right side of the brain reflects the left side of the brain, which reflects back to the right, but they're always a little different. So we get perspective, just like the 2 eyes, seeing from their slightly different perspectives. The next thing that I'm experiencing is a flow of bliss from the heart area up into the brainstem area. So that, I infer, is creating an awakening or a liveliness in the area of the brain which is responsible for filtering information and thus supporting the input of information which aligns with the experience of bliss. And for some people, this means clearing. And it's interesting, I see that clearing actually in other areas of the body. My awareness is lighting up. It's like going to the other areas, so that's why I say I'm seeing it. Beliefs that are held of not deserving to experience bliss, and also not trusting oneself, that, well, if I get into a blissful place where I'm really having a good old time, well, maybe I will be so happy that I will go outside the constraints of social dignity, or or do or say anything that's like not appropriate or whatever. that somehow I'll get out of my dignity, or I'll get out of my appropriateness by experiencing bliss. And if too much bliss is coming in, I'll get out of my alignment with those denser realms of creation. Remember, we have flexibility. We can be in the bliss, we can be in the lighter, higher areas of creation, and we can still traverse into the darker areas. It's okay. And if a little bit of the bliss is lost when we go in there, it's okay. We can come back and get more. Infinite. It's infinite resources in creation. The filter will filter that out sometimes, because the nature of the relative is that everything is boundaries. So what the filter is doing all the time is deciding which boundaries you can see and which ones you can't see, and where you're putting your edges and constraints. And for some people, those constraints are, it's not infinite bliss. It's not. If some of the realms are not experiencing infinite bliss, I guess you can say, well, in those areas, bliss is not existing, therefore it's not infinite. But the thing is, it is. Because infinities can exist in many, many different sizes. So you can have infinite bliss in one area of creation, and even so, there can be another area where it's not existing. It's okay. It's wonderful for our intellects to enjoy the process of realizing that it's not a black and white world, and that all possibilities are present in all places. I just want to finish up this healing, and then we'll go to the next question. Thank you for the questions. I really appreciate it. So what's happening right now is that everybody's being is creating a flow from the heart area, so that I infer from that basically what we're doing is we're creating energy medicine that's flowing up from the heart up into the brainstem area. And it is communicating, or speaking, we could say, speaking through the universal language of perception and experience to the brainstem area, that bliss is a reality. That the light that resides in the heavenly realms is a reality. And it's our reality. And as this awakening occurs in the brainstem area, what it does is it opens up the possibility to see more expressions of that in the relative field through the gross material senses. And as that happens, it starts to validate. It becomes like a snowball rolling down a hill. The gross material senses accept and receive and accept, and are more, one is the mind and the heart and the emotions and so forth, are able to integrate the reality that there are these experiences of sweetness. There are experiences of goodness and joy that are closer to the pure nature of being. All right. So thank you for joining me for that healing. I'll now go to this question. About the realms, thank you for such a clear explanation. You're welcome. I thought they were really interesting when I came across them. However, I somehow have always thought that the progression into the denser physical level itself, that is sequential supersymmetry breaking, which would be a physics term, thank you for that, is a progression from light to dark, from subtle to gross, or from positivity to its complete negation. It is a bit hard for me to also see the negative or dark side on the subtle levels too. Oh yeah, good. I like that. You're using your inner senses now. That's good. Well, you always have been. I know this lady. She uses her inner senses. It's a good question. For example, I see and know that angels sit at the throne of God, at the finest level of creation, at the junction point of relative and absolute. How can there be darkness here? Nice. All right. So thank you for this great question. So I think the best way to answer the question is to use some examples. So The first example is at the relative level of creation. And um, as I mentioned, I just kind of made a little kind of vague reference to it earlier, but let me go into a little bit more detail now. What we've noticed is that there are some places, there are some people, and there are some places on Earth where quality of life is high. And there are other places where it's not high. And I don't want to offend anybody, and I just want you to know that I'm not judging anybody. I'm not judging any of these locations, but we can, for example, compare and contrast quality of life in the US or Canada. And I think tonight we've got mostly US and Canada with us here. This quality of life that we're living for a lot of us here, to places like South Sudan, or just recently stories are starting to emerge from North Korea. My children, my sons, are very interested in world events, and they're always bringing me news from all around the world. And they're telling me right now that Sweden, things are not so good in Sweden. Statistics are showing things are not good in Sweden. And so even in the US, there's a range. We live just half a block from the high school. And I can tell you, some of the children at the high school are living in very nice, very sweet quality of life. There's a lot of innocence, and they're well nourished, and they have the resources to meet their requirements, their academic requirements, and they have lots of friends, and life is bliss. And there are other children who are really suffering. And it's a pretty big high school. I think there are over 1,000 children there. And as a mother living just stone's throw from the high school, my heart is with those children all the time. So I'm monitoring what's going on over there. And there are children who have, one girl was telling me that her parents became her parents when her mom was 13 and her dad was 12. No, wait, her mom was 14 and her dad was 13. That's what she said. That's when she was born. That means when, yeah, you can just do the math. And so, of course, she went into foster homes and then suffered abuse of every conceivable type and had her first baby. And then she was in therapy, and then she was in a mental institution. And this is a girl who's like not even 17 yet, having gone through all that. And then she was in a mental institution, and she was in therapy. And then she was a mother by the time she was 18 or 17 or something like that. So that happens too. And of course, dropped out of school. That happens. So this is in the relative. This is just the relative level of creation I'm talking about here. Everything from kids who are just doing great to kids who are really not doing great. And at the subtler levels of creation. Now, I just would like to say about the lady who asked this question, it's a great tribute to her purity as a being. It's a great tribute to your purity, to your wisdom, and to the beauty of your heart. That when you look into the subtle realms of creation, you just see the sweetest, nicest, prettiest, most lovely things there. You're like one of those kids over at the high school who are doing really good. But I can tell you that that's not the case with everyone. That in fact, the man who made this presentation about the different realms of creation, who does the out-of-body experiences. And I think this is one reason why maybe it could be dangerous to do out-of-body experiences, is that he has found that in the darker places in creation, and if you really want to know about them, you can read his blog about what happens to suicide bombers. That there are places where there are beings whose bodies are not physical, that are very fine, and that they're pretty scary, pretty dark, nasty pants beings. The nasty pants places. And those are places. And when I read his blog, I said to myself, well, someone's got to be the mom. Someone's got to go over and help those guys, because when I read about their reality, it did not look good, guys. It was bad. And also, I would like to say, if any of you have sensitive stomachs, please don't read his blog about that, because that was really nasty. But on the one hand, on the other hand, when I went there, I looked. What I discovered is that we all leave a mark wherever we go. And if it's possible for those who wish to leave a mark which uplifts. After I went to that place, I started looking into human trafficking and other dark stuff. I looked a little bit to see, well, what can I do? How can energy healing help, right? How can it help people in very terrible situations? What I discovered is that because the realms are collectively produced, it requires collective effort to undo the darkness. So I, as an individual, and I really worked hard, guys. I spent like a whole night, or maybe 2 nights, just really, really looking into some of the scariest, most really terrible places and stuff. And what could I do as an individual? And it wasn't as much as I would have liked, I confess. And that's why I really sincerely feel that the future of energy healing is for us to work as we are now in the webinar, to work collectively to undo some of the densities in the subtler realms of creation, which is easy to do in energy healing, because it's just a matter of bringing attention, the light of pure attention, and the intention to produce an effect that's life supporting, life nourishing, life giving. So thank you to the lady who just put up her little point here, and I won't say your name because it goes out to the public, but just to say, putting this here, so working collectively is such a glorious and beautiful notion. Count on us. Oh, thank you. Yes, everyone. It's like having multiple eyes on something, that each of us sees it from our slightly different perspective. And on that note, I just want to give you this great example, this great story, because this just happened last night and it was so yummy and perfect. Okay, so one of the people who I think is in on this session tonight, I should just say to him that last night I had a long extended dream that this particular man who's in on my webinars, who really is a very fascinating and evolved soul, that we spent hours in dream state looking into the mechanics of how we as collective produce the realms of creation, how we give rise to different realms with different qualities. And at the end of that dream, I had a dream where I was with my beautiful, sweet teenage daughter. And in my dream, and I won't go to too much detail for the sake of her privacy, but in that dream, there was an interaction with 2 male people in my dream. So this morning, my daughter comes down and she says, "Mom, I had this dream, and I dreamed that they were these 2 men." And then she described the interaction. And I thought, well, isn't that fancy pants? Because I'd had the dream, I'd had this dream about the situation where I was with her, and then there were these 2 people that we were interacting with. And she also had the dream and in the dream, I manifested as a home. Mother manifested as home. So I was kind of like her anchor in the dream. But so there were slight variations between the way she perceived the dream and the way I perceived the dream. So the dream landscape, the collective landscape, was sort of more flexible and fluid, as it should be in the finer realms of creation. But anyway, it was an interesting thing. So I just thought I'd bring that up. There was more to that whole story, but as it applies, I'd like to go to the next question, though, because we've got more. Oh, lots of great questions. I love you guys. Okay, so here's another question. You're discussing bliss coming from the heart. Nice. What about the bliss entering through the crown chakra and filling the brain and downward to the rest of the body? Oh, well. So just as in the dream scape, the experience is like slightly different from one person to the next person like that. And we phase in and out with each other. So also in the healing experience, that happens too, because ultimately each person's own divine self is doing the healing. So what I'm doing is I'm presenting from my angle and perspective what's going on with the healing. And heaven knows I miss things, because as a human, it's my pleasure and joy to be continuing to expand my consciousness too. So yes, actually, this is one of the main areas. Crown of the head is one of the primary areas where the essence of divine being communicates its reality to the manifest level of self. And so absolutely, if one experiences divine being as bliss, then that will be the experience. And I believe it's somewhat, and this is where we're going to have actually a whole webinar on our collective work with the different realms and our collective healings and stuff, but just as a little taste of that, I believe that one of the variations from one person to another in the finer levels of ourselves is a person's intent in their lives. For example, at one point I was trying to convince one of my sons of something. I have these sparring matches with this one son, man. And I was trying to explain to him, well, if I started my sentence, well, if you want to be happy and live a happy, comfortable life, then, and I never got to finish my sentence because I was cut mid-sentence to find out that he has no intention of having a happy, comfortable life, that all he wants is a life with meaning. So, okay. So never mind that argument that I was about to present to him. But what I realized was that if a person's nature, if they've decided within themselves that the thrust of their life, that the flow of their life is to have a meaningful life, is to have a life that is marked or is accented with important events, and that the effect that they have on the field around them is powerful and transformative in the highest and best possible way. Not necessarily comfortable, but at least transformative in the highest and best possible way. Then what they may experience coming through the crown of the head might not be identified as blissful. It might be identified as just rich with knowingness or something like that. And my experience for the person who asked that question, because I think we're more similar, is that knowledge, knowingness, wisdom is by its nature blissful. The effect, the interface with the human system, knowledge, when it interfaces, it gives rise to that experience of, oh, I'm learning something new. And so that experience is I find it a very blissful experience. And I know that's why that guy likes to spar with me too. Because in the sparring session, whether it's admitted or not, there is that experience of, oh, okay. So now we're coming up to a whole new level of understanding. We're creating knowledge as we go. And I think that is definitely one of the primary reasons why working as a collective is so powerful and so beautiful. So more on that in one of the upcoming webinars. You can read online about that. So here's another question. Thank you, by the way, for that beautiful question. Thank you for sharing your refined perception and your bliss. Okay, hi. Someone said, this is another person, someone said that her sister has a film or dense stuff. Yeah, I know this person and her sister. So yes, has a film or dense stuff, possibly from the time of her birth, in the place that connects both sides of the brain, right? Like the corpus callosum, right? The area where it reflects back and forth. Yes, I agree completely. Yes. Is it possible to do a clearing to help both sides of the brain connect for everyone too? Thanks. thanks for the question. This is a great question. It's a great question. So I'm going to just reference a little bit back to Jürgen Zeewe, the guy who saw the realms, who did this big, he was interviewed on Back Gap, a nice guy, sweet guy, interviewed on Back Gap about the different realms of creation. What he noticed was that in the very lowest realms of creation, the very densest, the very most horrible realms, that all the beings there seemed to be psychotic. It was like mental illness level stuff. The next level up that was also terrible were people that were just completely caught up in their own stuff and can't get past themselves, kind of, in their egos or whatever. But thank you, everyone's sweet, high-frequency nervous systems being a support for this. I think this is a really good example of a way that we as a collective with the higher frequencies vibrating in our nervous systems can comfortably or safely, I would say, look into the denser area, which in this case we can, with the blessings of the being in my friend's sister, we can appreciate her as the blueprint for a healing that could help lots of people who have mental illness. And of course, that goes for other people that I'm working with right now too, because I've got some folks with mental illness that I'm working with. So for all these people, when we go in with our really finer, lighter, higher frequency nervous systems, what happens is the finer frequency reflects off the denser frequency. And because the finer frequency is closer to truth, in a sense, it's closer to pure being by its nature, it tends to always be the winner. But in some people's physiologies, they've got things wired up inside so that the higher frequency vibration isn't the winner. And that is an isolated situation. And it is isolated, and it makes perfect sense that it would be isolated between the two sides of the brain. Because the right side of the brain, if you're right-handed, the right side of the brain that controls the left side of the body is the side that tends to experience reality in its more unbounded nature. It tends to be unconstrained by space-time and have more of a sense of unity with all of creation and like that. And it interfaces with the left side of the brain, which is responsible for pretty much everything that has to do with how we interface with the relative. So we could say that these two sides are interfacing or working with each other. And if there is, what I see is something that looks like a little node or a little knot inside the corpus callosum area that acts like a bump or it disrupts the flow of really clear communication between the two sides of the brain. And that's not uncommon for people who have challenges, mental health challenges. And I could bring up examples, but I won't waste our time. We can just go in and do the work. Another of the areas in there that's near that interface between the two sides of the brain are structures in the brain that support the ability to interact with the world in an appropriate manner. So that's also where I'm seeing some of the disruption. So it's very innocent on her part. You know, the fact that she has difficulty interacting with the world appropriately is because it looks like there are physical structures as well as energetic structures. But the physical structures are expressions of the energetic structures. And the energetic structures, the energetic structures are present as, I would say, they appear to me to look like threads or hooks or cords connected with those denser realms of creation. So what it does is it creates this effect of her life force in her sweet body and her sweet being feeding the denser realms of creation. It's like there's a little structure in there that goes into the brain and then causes a leaching of life force or her. It's another point that I thought would be relevant to today's webinar, but I wasn't quite sure the tie-in, and now I'm seeing it. So just saying to everyone, we're doing this healing now for mental illness. However, oh, by the way, I filmed 2 healings for mental illness or 3 healings for them that haven't been uploaded yet. So just saying, I will put those up online because I know sometimes people who have mental illness would like to privately work on that. And so in the comfort of one's home on YouTube, you can go look at those videos. We'll upload those. Anyway. There's really, really, really a lot of discordant feeling that is the form out of which those cords are created. Really a lot. When I go in and feel it, I feel a lot of fear, a lot of fear, a lot of fear, a lot of like gripping fear and paranoia and what I would call glyphotic energies, which are emotions that are kind of more intense than regular feelings, that are like enhanced discordant feelings, glyphotic energies. My dear Nick gave me that word. So I'm just feeling the glyphotic energies, and as I feel them, the natural tendency is to fold back into my own infinite being, which is full of light and full of bliss and full of knowledge and so forth. It's sweet and very high vibrational energy, and just allow that source of creation energy to interface with the constructs of those threads, which are feeding into the middle of the brain there and are responsible for the neurological anomalies that are giving rise to her erratic behavior. And thank you to everybody in this session. What we're doing is we're holding on to that silence. How many people enjoyed the eclipse? Speaking of silence, it's very chaotic energy because the sun, yeah, right. The eclipse, man, that was something. The sun represents that aspect, that eternal aspect of self, that divine aspect of self, and moon represents the mind. So what happens in the solar eclipse is that the mind covers up the self or the being. And because the brilliance of the mind is a reflection of the being, once the mind covers up its own source of creativity and intelligence and wisdom and light, then all of a sudden the mind is thrown into a space of darkness as well. So the energy of the eclipse can be quite chaotic. However, what I found was I was looking into, well, how does an energy healer deal with all that? And the first thing that I noticed is whenever we're in a place where the energies are really, really chaotic, as in going to the darker realms of creation, one has to be extra vigilant. And so that extra vigilance means watching every little move, every little inner move, every little outer move, making lots of extra connections and really being very kind of more hypersensitive to what's going on, just so that discrimination can kick in a full value so that one can tell the truth from the non-truth. because that's really important when things get chaotic. Just like now, trying to figure out what's the news these days, right? It's like you've got the left and the right, and they're all spinning everything their own direction, and it's very difficult to tell. So one has to be extra vigilant and extra discriminative. And what I found is that in order to be discriminative enough to be at a level where I could find pure truth in the chaos that was created worldwide by the eclipse, I had to be at a really, really, really deep level of my own inner silence. Now, I've been meditating since I was 15 years old, so I'm quite familiar with the experience of transcending thought and going to my inner silence. But I had an experience of silence during the eclipse that was beyond anything I've ever experienced. And I felt such deep gratitude to the cosmic patterns, the flow of cosmic life in our universe that created a situation, such a condition that would give rise to the experience of that level of silence. It was a special silence. And once, it's like going into the heavenly realms of creation. Once you've been there and you know how sweet that light is, there's a part of the body that never forgets. And so from that time forward, thank you to the eclipse, we have awakened silence. And the beauty of all of us as reflectors is that when one person has an experience, like this beautiful man who had the experience of the bliss coming in the crown of his head, once his body is doing that experience, then we all get to enjoy the benefits of such an experience. It's a blessing for everyone. So same thing. It doesn't, as a group, and this is how we're looking into our group dynamics. And I want you to know that we are working this out now as a group. We're examining some of the mechanics of how energy healing works in a group, because it's something that we can't explore. I can't explore when I'm alone. I can only explore it when I'm with you. That's why I love you. That's why I'm so happy that we're doing this together. So if any one person in the group rises up and has an experience of a certain level of refinement or height or perception or clarity or intelligence or wisdom, then that experience can become a marker for the whole group. And everybody can bounce their own experience off of it. So thank you, everyone, for being amazing. And thank you to my dear friend and to her sweet sister, who is really, really a very sweet person, for being the central pivot of that healing for mental illness, and for everyone in this group for helping with that. Thanks. We'll probably look at that some more, because that's probably the darkest realm that there is, at least according to Jürgen Ziwe, that is the darkest realm. So we'll probably be revisiting that one as we get stronger. There was some pretty heavy stuff there, guys. I was like, okay, I'm not going to talk about that. Anyway, okay, so another question. Somebody asked a question. Somebody asked a question that just between the two of us, so I'm not going to read out her question. Let me just read the whole thing first, and then I'll comment. Right. Okay, so what this lady is pointing out, she's a meditation teacher, that there's a point that out-of-body experiences, there's danger associated with out-of-body experiences, and darn right there is. Darn right there's danger associated. That's why, anyway, I have a lot of respect for this guy who's been doing this for years. But also well, no comment. I took my read on his physiology. It's okay. Anyway, he's a really sweet guy. But yes, there are dangers associated with out-of-body experiences. I definitely don't recommend it. And what I do recommend, though, is that in an integrated, in the body fashion, this is what energy healing is. This is energy healing. This is what we're doing in this webinar, is that integrated in the physiology, we have an anchor that allows us as human beings to traverse the entire range of that. Is that the x-axis or is that the x, y? Okay, so we're to traverse the whole range of that x-axis. If the y-axis goes from very dense to very subtle, the x-axis goes from very unpleasant to very pleasant. So, anchored in the physiology, we have the resources to bring light into the darkness and thus pay back for the mother of creation. Payback. Because coming into alignment with divinity allows us the experience of these beautiful, heavenly, exquisite, blissful realms of creation. And it's such a gift and it's such a pleasure. And it is the byproduct of lifetimes of devotion to the highest and to, completely altruistic and supportive activity, well-being, world peace, But the payback is when we stabilize it by going into the denser realms of creation and uplifting them. And that can be done in the physical form. Because the physical form, it moves slow. So it holds on to the high vibration. So for at least a while, you charge up your battery, then you can go over there and you can create some nice good for people, and then you can go back and charge your battery some more. Hanging out in the heavenly realms most of the time, unless called, of course. And maybe for some people, that's not a calling, and maybe for other people it is. I don't know. But in energy healing, it's nice. If we're healing something in our own bodies or we're healing something, helping somebody else heal something in their own bodies, then it does involve some flow back and forth. And that's flexibility, right? And it's good to be flexible and stable. And what causes stability is exercising flexibility. The more we allow ourselves to move back and forth along the x-axis, at all different levels of density, the more we stabilize bliss. We stabilize that purity at every level of the physical form, at the physical level and at the emotional level and at the being level, like that. Okay, guys are amazing. I love it. More questions. Thank you for that beautiful question. Okay. Oh, here's somebody. Hi, dear Dorothy. And then she gave me a little flower. Hi, dear Dorothy. When you reference realms, is that the same as dimensions, like we're living in the third dimension while able to move to higher fourth and fifth? Namaste. So I would like to say to this, yes. However, I'm not using the word dimensions. Now, Jürgen Ziwe uses the word dimensions. That's his word that he uses for these realms. And the reason I'm not using the word realms is because as you know, I discuss these things with my sparring partner, my 21-year-old son. And so when I used the word dimension with him, he immediately cut me off and said, Mom, you can't use that word because that's a word that's used in physics. And we aren't sure yet, we haven't figured it out yet, if there really is a one-to-one correlation between these realms of creation and the dimensions known in physics. I said, okay, let's call them planes of existence because they seem to be on different planes. There seem to be distinct planes of existence. No, Mom, you can't use planes because planes is a geometry term, and he's a mathematician, and you can't use that. So, okay, fine. We won't use planes. How about realms? Okay, Mom, you can use realms. We'll use realms. So we're using realms at the moment. And I'm just doing that because as we're going along here and as we work together as a collective, because as we know, these realms are collectively formed. So we are going to discover more about them in our group, probably than I will ever be able to discover about them on my own. So yay for the group. In the meantime, until we're quite sure what we're doing with all this stuff, I'm calling them realms. And I think that some people, particularly in a lot of New Age circles, when they talk about the third dimension and the higher fourth dimension, they are talking, I think, because I've done some reading on this also, and I do believe that a lot of the people that are talking about dimensions in the particular way that you're referring to them here are talking about these realms where the fourth, the higher realms of creation are sweeter. And in the higher realms, the fourth and fifth dimension or sixth dimension or whatever, that's when everybody is experiencing their existence in a much more life-supporting and high-frequency level. People refer to the fourth and fifth as being in a higher frequency. And I'll have to discuss that with my physics friends, not during the webinar, and then we'll come back to you and let you know what's going on with that. Okay, another question. I love it. Thank you for that great question. That was an awesome question. Okay, here's another question. Oh, I love all the questions tonight, you guys. This is just bliss. Oh gosh, and we've come to our time. Okay, there are 2 more questions. I will try to answer them quickly because we have already come to our time. We've been having a lot of fun tonight, man. Okay, so here we go. Here's another question. Through our meditations, can we hold a space to raise the vibration of various realms, even if the realm is not clearly defined? Beautiful question. Absolutely, I would say yes. And the holding of the space is a combination of the physiology itself, like resonating with that higher vibrational quality. Like, I know you guys, you keep these sweet environments where you are, you're ever dedicated and devoted to keeping at least the space around yourself kind of light and bright and wholesome and pure, and everything from lighting candles to keeping crystals around and listening to the 1,000 names of Mother Divine, or whatever the different things that we can do to uplift our spaces, or just keeping the energies light, keeping it clean and orderly, keeping a clean, orderly space. So we're tending to naturally resonate at a fairly high frequency level anyway. So yes, when we're interacting with people or with situations or circumstances, or just very specific, particular part of the body or something which isn't feeling well, then part of the holding of the higher vibration is that the body itself is holding that vibration. And I would like to add at this point, and I think I've referred to them in the past, but I just want to strengthen this because it's such a good point, is that we make energy medicines, we make light medicines in our being, particularly when the nature of our thoughts and feelings of action and actions is oriented towards the upliftment of creation. We make these beautiful light medicines that communicate at a cellular and subcellular level to our own bodies. I recommend you do this at night when you're sleeping. That's when I do it, and you can do it for hours, and it's just bliss. We create these beautiful light medicines that support further stabilization of the high frequency values in the physical body. So they support levels of health, opulent health, that are a really, really high level. So make those medicines, you guys. Maybe I should do note to my team. Can you make a note that I should make a video about this particular medicine? And I think I may have referenced it in some videos that are already up, but maybe do a special video for it because it's Really nice. And I could go into a lot more detail, but we're out of time. And I want to catch the last question. Dorothy, can we put some healing attention on the people in Texas who are facing an enormous hurricane tomorrow? Thank you, my darling. I did not even know that was happening. So, yes. So, Texas. So, what we're doing here, and we'll do this as a group healing. And for those, I know some of you may have to run off because we're over time, but for those who'd like to stay, let's do this because it's timely. And then we should upload it tomorrow so that more people can join us. The healing for the hurricane in Texas. So the first thing we're going to do is gently turn our attention to Texas. Texas as a state, and particularly the regions that are most in line with the upcoming hurricane, has an energy signature which is unique unto itself. And when we think of Texas, there's a feel to Texas that's completely different than the feel of Oregon, or the feel of Wisconsin, or the feel of Japan, or anywhere else in the world. Texas has its feel. Texans are independent. Texans do it their way, and it's a big state, and there's a lot of power, and there's a lot of strength, and a lot of community. There's a strong community values in Texas. So the first thing that's happening is we're just getting a read on what's feeling. Now, once we've got the overall feel of Texas, now we want to go in and we're taking a read on the emotional conditions and states of people. And the first thing we're doing is clearing fear. And I see another question's come in. And one person says, thank you so much for asking that question. My brother and friends are there. And yes, I have cousins there too. So in fact, there are people in this webinar who are in Texas right now. So for everybody, thank you. So clearing fear. And it looks like the fear is clearing from the etheric level, that realm. So we're at the etheric dimension on the y-axis, and we're looking at fear in the x-axis. So that fear is, it's like activation or enlivenment in the etheric level. And also looks like some to the mental level, because there are one of the things that every event, every challenging situation comes up specifically to create purification for particular areas of being. So the area where we're experiencing the density, that's the area where the purification is taking place. At the mental level, what's happening is I'm seeing a lot of people have a tendency to habitually run little dark dialogues, like little worry. They get the worry starts to go out of balance in the system, and they start predicting the worst. And I think for a lot of people, the tendency to predict the worst is a byproduct of feeling that their underlying belief beneath that habit is the belief that, well, if I predict the worst, I will prepare for the worst, and then I'll be prepared. Whereas the next guy who's living in some kind of bliss ninny state is not going to be prepared, and that's the person who's really going to get hit. And I would like to add to that also goes with a belief that there is a limited amount of good and a limited amount of bad in creation. So if the next guy gets hit, I won't. And that's actually not true. That there's infinite. It's infinite. So what we want to do is we want to get out of the fields where the infinite unpleasantries reside and into the fields that are sweeter and softer and more gentle. Good that Texas is going to get some rain, maybe already getting some rain. But those habits and those little internal cycles that sit in the mental body, and they have correlates in the brain wiring itself to feel like it's somehow noble or good or useful to run internal dialogues that are highly negative. I love you, but that Every little thought is a little gust of wind. Every little negative thought of doom and gloom is another lightning bolt. So this, the goal and the purpose is to not get caught in it. For those who have adapted to habits of running those negative thought cycles, and let me tell you, they run them on everything, not just on the upcoming storm, but a lot of self-criticism and high expectations on self and judgments on others and so forth. So those little cycles have been garbed in the illusion of honor, and that is illusion. And so the illusory value is the tool of the denser realms of creation. So the first thing is to bust through the illusion. And we're going to do that for multiple generations, because the habit of running dark mental cycles or dark mental patterns is inherited. So what we're doing is gently, and what a group, maybe not even so gently, what a group. What I'm seeing in our collective is that in our collective, we have an awakening or an enlivenment of the aspects of self which are highly positive, highly, but very, very abstract, like they look like threads of light, but they are really forms of intelligence, of being. You can think of them as angelic forms, you can think of them as ascended master forms, you can think of them however you like to think of them, but know that they are yourself. This is what's important. It is one's own being. And in our collective, it's beautiful what's happening is this area is a shared area. It's a shared area of self, and it's forming into a highly integrated structure. And this highly integrated, full of light, full of solid, like stable positivity is overlaying the, and I would say it's like folding, like a self-referral loop from the level of ourselves where we're already unified there. And so we interface with all the people who are burdened by their own inner dialogues that are dark or dense or give rise to discordant feelings, and then they get addicted to the discordant feelings. So it's overlaying over the 4 denser levels of the physiology. In fact, I'm seeing it actually overlaying from the causal level all the way up to the physical level. So there's a fold from the celestial and collective levels up to the dense level of creation. And the overlay is extremely orderly, and it's infused with totally rich value of silence. And the silence trumps all. It's only a matter of just sitting with it. The orderliness is solid, and it is impenetrable, and it represents the highest truth, which is there's infinite good in creation and there's infinite bad in creation, and you always have a choice where you want to align yourself. And the choice to align with the good stabilizes the good in the physiology so that you can go back. And this is the big message for the people who are holding the denser level, is that you can go back to the dense and you can heal it only when you've got the light stabilized enough in the physiology that you won't be overshadowed. But if you try to go in, that's what people are doing when they get caught in negative thought patterns, is they're really trying to undo the negative thought patterns. But if they've gotten so habituated and so gripped into them, all that happens is they end up recycling them and causing that realm to grow. So what we're doing is overlaying the reality of the mechanics of how the light is stabilized in the physiology, stabilized at all the dense levels of the physiology, from the causal level all the way up to the physical level, and offering that as the antidote or the gift. into this field of the collective. Yeah, we've got people from Texas. Oh, one of the ladies from Texas says no rain here yet, but it's on its way. And another lady says, this has just been the most fabulous webinar. Thank you. So to everyone who's here, thank you for creating an instant umbrella of light and sweetness. And what it's going to do is it's going to work with the people who are stabilizing or holding the denser realms of creation. And those are the realms that, if they get a chance to manifest up to the surface, is going to result in like collapsed buildings and deaths and floods and stuff like that. So the umbrella is the umbrella of divine being, warmed up as an orderly structure, manifesting the antidote for all those dear individuals who've spent much of their lives cycling around in negative thought cycles and negative emotional patterns, because really, really what they really want to do is they want to heal all that stuff. Now everybody has the antidote. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for staying with me in such a long webinar. Bless you. I hope everyone gets a chance to go to bed right away after this. I love you dearly. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. And we will take off where we ended today in tomorrow's webinar and have the blessings of even more of the dear Europeans with us. And thank you all for joining me. And I hope to see you tomorrow too. And everyone will get recordings of everything. Good night.